Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Hopefully your day is going well. Pheng here. He, him, his are my pronouns with the Men, Masculine Folks Network. Thank you for joining us on our 12th Kitchen Table Conversations, really looking at community care and creating community and paralleling that with individualism. And so that'll be somewhat of the conversation today, but before I go on further to explain what we're gonna be talking about today with the siblings here, have them again introduce themselves so that you all who are watching us and participating with us, engaging us in this conversation know who you want to be directing your questions or comments to.
Hello, everyone. My name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm reporting from Eagan, Minnesota. I'm super excited of having this conversation with all of you guys.
And hey, everybody. My name is Sean Hayes. Pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm coming to you from Duluth, Minnesota. Definitely glad to be back. Missed all of y'all.
Greetings, everybody. I'm Brandon Jones. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm reporting from Woodbury, Minnesota.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ed Heisler. I use he and him pronouns, and I'm here in Duluth, Minnesota as well. Been looking forward to seeing you all day.
Thank you. And thanks again to those who are watching with us and continuing to engage in these conversations with us so vitally. I think important that we as men and masculine folks continue to think about how we navigate masculinity and manhood in the environment that we're in the lives that we live, in the relationship that we have with other folks, and how do we do that. What we've learned often is doing that and being in relationship with other men and masculine folks and creating spaces like this is always helpful. So just a quick reminder there of the importance of creating spaces like this for men to do this processing. You know, 2 weeks ago, we talked about what happened at the US Capitol, and so I think some of us and all of us here are still in some ways reeling from what happened, even though it transpired about 2 weeks ago, or more than 2 weeks ago now. And in our conversation 2 weeks ago, we had talked about what it meant in relationship to gender-based violence, what the riots meant in relationship to that, what was the connection to that. And continuing from that conversation and going a little bit more deeper, really looking at this idea and this notion of, because individualism is quite strong and heavy in this country, right? And we love the individual, and we are always having ideas and statements about, like, you made it yourself, that you did this yourself, and all of this, like, self-preservation and self-interest and self, and the focus on the self. I think there are great things to that, but at some point, if we add that to, and if that is compounded to all of the things that we talked so far along about patriarchy, which is the notions of being strong, the notion of being decisive, the notions of, like, you are making it yourself and living in hierarchy that's in relationship to our lives as men and masculine folks. I think if we aren't careful, we're going to create bad outcomes and bad choices. And some of that, I think we can see in some of the men that showed up at the Capitol, of, like, this really entitled piece of, like, this belongs to us, we're gonna get it no matter what, you should know how I'm feeling, you should know that you've wronged me, and we're gonna take what is ours, right? And I think that it'll be good, and we believe that it'll be good to also explore that conversation and really think about how do we actually, like, do individualism in a way that's actually healthy, and also am able to at the same time invest and build in community and center community as we invest in our own masculine identities and male privilege, or ideas of who we are as male identified individuals, So that I just want to frame and share that a little bit. And there's no real questions, but I'm sure that all of the siblings here have some ideas of where the conversation can go around individualism and community care, and how do we take the best of both worlds in a way that's going to be healthy for us as male identified folks without harming others along the way, right?
I'll dive in since no one else wants to just yet. As I reflect on the events that took place at the Capitol, on masculinity and identity and who I am as a Black man, it's fascinating. It makes me even question my American identity and what that means, and how my identity as a Black American may be very different than other people. And I've seen this notion throughout social media since over the last few weeks of we live in two different Americas. And I think that there's a hint of truth in that there are people who are living a different perspective on what America is supposed to be to them, and what we're all here to, how we all look at our own nationalism and what is freedom, and these ideas and these ideals that we believe we all share, but I think we all kind of go at it a little differently, and we all kind of manifest our own concept of it differently. I think it is filtered through a cultural lens. So what some would say was freedom, and that was an act of freedom and choice, I would not necessarily say that. I would say that was an act of, so some people would say that was an act of terrorism. And I don't know if that was necessarily the truth either, but it was definitely something unprecedented, as this whole 2020 plus and plus a little bit of this year has been. That was something we haven't seen in our lifetime, is acts such as that. And also to be influenced by political figures to do such actions. So it makes me really question what is everyone's idea of freedom. Is it an individual kind of concept, or is this a collective thing, or is it just group based, where some groups believe freedom's one thing and some groups believe freedom is another? So I'm still pondering and still thinking about the events that took place, and wondering, where does that energy go from here? Because just because we had inauguration doesn't mean that that's over. And what's next, if there is anything to come? So those are some of my thoughts at the moment.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said there, Brandon, just about, because I've been kind of, digesting, I think, as all of us have been, over the last 4 years, the last couple of weeks. I mean, there's so much happening all the time. And yeah, that piece around different communities and what we're taught, like I can remember when I was growing up, like it was really important, and it was like a very strong value that my family had and held and tried to teach us, as kids, about, was that individualism, this American dream kind of thing, which, growing up and learning that, like, that all sounds great. Of course, I would come out of that sort of an education system as well, believing that, oh yeah, if you live in America, you're free and you have, the same liberties and all of that as others. And I think, the more that I'm able to connect with other folks and other communities and really do a lot of learning around that, it's like, whoa, okay, like my instinct is to go against that immediately and be like, okay, hold on, this individualism thing that I was taught, I need to think critically about that, and I need to, dig a little deeper into that. And so, yeah, I'm just kind of thinking about the ands of the situation. I think, as Pheng mentioned, like, they're, individualism as itself is, I think that there are really great things that I've been learning about, like how do we find our whole selves? How do we live our lives like actually being honest about our emotions and our fears and our successes, and living in that sort of a way? And also, you know, not being disconnected from community, like it's both for me. So how do we grow as individuals? And then how do we also learn how to do that while we're connecting into community with other people, other individuals who are trying to grow and learn and do better and have fun and be joyful in community together?
In my case, I was teach to learn as an individual, you know, as a man, as a Latino, what was in my surroundings, and also thinking in my reality. That was what that was my identity. That's how I felt. But it make you think, you know, that your reality is what's around you, and make you kind of selfish, because sometimes you don't think about community, you think about you and your circles and what's around you, and without realizing that sometimes you're affecting, you know, the people around you. And as a man, you know, they teach you to be tough, they teach you to, you know, from the community you learned, you know, to have a lot of girlfriends, to be certain ways that cause harm. So when you think about the individual, you forget, you isolate sometimes of community without realizing the need that we have from the community to feed us, to make us accountable, to do better. And and when we think about me as an individual, I didn't realize how much harm maybe I caused, you know, to others. So community is something that it help us to do better. It create communities of support, communities of healing that help us to do better. And is even that is important to understand ourselves, understand how we react, how we are. I think community is something that understand a little bit better our communities, because it's not just Latinos. You know, the United States is we have an Asian community, we have Latino community, we have African American community. It's so diverse. Sometimes when we isolate ourselves and just think as individual, we forget about that. So yeah.
I agree with what you have all said so far, and I guess I think about there is like a lot of cultural context to how we're taught about community and individualism and collective. And the American dream is, you know, the one that I grew up in, and it really is a way of thinking about community, collective, and individualism, oftentimes through a lens of like, you know, how high can you make it up the ladder, and how much can you get? And one of the things that I guess I would add to what folks have already said about that and other things is that, you know, there really is no such thing actually as just being an individual isolated on your own. The principles that you know, that exist around individualism, like take care of number one, and you know, just watch out for yourself, and set things up so that they work around you. You know, that form of individualism relies on the things around you. Like we all breathe air that moves all around. We all drink water that exists in a community sense. We all have you know, friends, family members. We all go to grocery stores and eat food, and like we rely on natural systems and communities of people and all sorts of beings in order to exist in our lives. So like there is a way of seeing yourself as an individual that is like in opposition to that, or in an arrangement that puts you at the center of your relationship to those people and things that are needed for life. And then there's also a way of understanding yourself as an individual, as somebody who's whole, like Sean said, that that is responsible to like the balance and gets to be in the mix of what it means to be connected to other people and resources like water and things like this. And there's like you know, there's in a short amount of time, you know, there's a big difference between the the two ways of looking at things. And I think for me and the way that I was raised, you know, I have components of both. Like I really learned how to be in community and care for people and find joy and play games and nourish things that are good and help people like be at their best. And I also learned ways of thinking about myself as a man, as a white person, as a straight hetero normative person, cisgendered, like to think of myself as different, to see the ways that I do things as better, and to like be able to step into a way of being in this country that allows for me to like get more stuff, like actually have more power and resources because of it. And to me, that's kind of at the center. Like the trade-off is one of balance and everybody being able to have a sense of safety versus, you know, some people having access at the expense of others.
Yeah, I think you are sharing, I think, a lot of great points. And I think in the deciphering of it, that's coming to my mind is I'm like, okay, so when we talk about like male power and male privilege, where does that come from, right? And that I think comes from the ideas of like that men are in charge, that men are the ones who make decision. Masculine folks are the ones that should be leaders and are in leadership position. They're the ones who can be decisive, think on their feet. They're the ones who should climb up the ladder, as you were talking, Ed. And they're the ones who could actually lead. They're the ones who can be leaders. And it's like some of those ideals and ideas are tied to what it means to be an individual, and tied to individualism as well, about the self and trying to protect yourself only and trying to protect what you've gained, right? And then it's also tied to the very idea and notion of that we should give men more power, we should give men more privilege, you know? And so I think it becomes really murky on what individualism is, and then what are patriarchal ideas, and or are those things like mixed in together with each other. And I say that because I think I was thinking about when you were talking, I was thinking about like growing up in like my community, in the home community. We're quite a collective community, but individualism shows up, and the way that it shows up is through how we raise our boys. Okay, we raise our boys to be individuals. We raise our boys to be in a community that's going to care for him. We raise our boys to believe that he is going to be the head of his household. We raise him to know that he has to make decisions, and he makes decisions on behalf of other people, right? That he participates in that decision-making process, that he's going to be the one that carries the family name. He's going to be the one that carries the lineage of the family. And so he's really well compensated, quote unquote, or really well socialized to believe that he is an individual, such as myself. I was raised in that kind of a context, right? Where I believed that I was an individual. And when I got married, my partner then took on my name, right? Her sense of like, her name was no longer there. And I know that this happens in a lot of patriarchal communities. It isn't just the Hmong community. And so I'm just like sitting with this murky area of like, how do we decipher and pull out in a way that we can see it all clearly, if we can. And then on top of that, on top of just that story that I'm sharing there in that specific example about my community, then you're embedded in a community and in a society that holds these notions of very high as well, and value it deeply as well too. So it gets compounded even further, right? It gets compounded even further. But yet then you have like structural racism, systemic racism, and institutionalized racism and white supremacy that impact my life as a man of color, right? That I'm not then seen as that kind of an individual that can achieve the way that I should be able to achieve. I'm not seen as the hero that we see on in movies, or not thought of as somebody that can save everybody, or so I yeah, I'm just thinking about all those things that's coming to my mind in this conversation of like, what is patriarchy, and then tied to individualism, and what's the connection between the two, and when the two are together, what harm can be caused. And I think, to me, we sort of saw that at the Capitol, at the riots, with a lot of the men that stormed the Capitol, who were particularly white men, saying that, coming in with such entitlement, right? That's the word that I'm going to use at this moment. Like, that they own the place, and that what they were doing was so right. To Brandon's point about, freedom is like, I had the right to do this. You had wronged me, and this is what I'm going to do. And there better not be any consequences to this, right? Because you've wronged me so much here, and I see that in the most micro level. I see that in, like, when men kill their partners, when men kill their wives, that it's such a, like, she deserved this death because she had wronged me so bad, and how dare she leaves me, because we know that domestic violence happens when, is most volatile when a woman chooses to leave her partner, and the person who's harming her. And when he's going to lose that control, he's going to enact it out, and he's going to say it is his right to do that. And I think the seeping part for me of that is the self-interest that is tied to individualism, the self and self-preservation of, like, I want to preserve what I have, right? And the self-preservation of, I want to preserve what I have, is I want to make sure that she is going to leave the way that I want her to leave, and with the control part in it, right? Which is, the self-preservation isn't so much about internal control that you were talking about, Sean, but it's like external control, right?
One of the things that is interesting with this conversation, and just thinking of that event as one of the leading events that we're talking about, is even though those individuals felt like a boundary was crossed on an individual level, they took collective action to voice that opinion. And that makes me think, even prior to this event, because I think a lot about, what is individualism, and some people use the term rugged individualism, and what is collectivism. Because as human beings, it's hard for us to, say that we are 100% individuals. You can't survive 100% by yourself. It's really hard. Even if you wanted to go in the middle of Wyoming in the woods, you would still have to come into town or go to a well that was probably created by someone, right, to survive. And so there's a balance here. There's a balance between how much individuality we take versus how much collectivity we take. And even when I think of things, because I know we're going to talk about healing and what that looks like as well, even how we talk about healing, we talk about it as what? Self-care. But then when you talk about what type of measures of self-care, it usually involves social activities, right? Sometimes it's spend time alone, get away from your family, especially as a lot of us are in these remote spaces. But a lot of it's also social. Make sure you have good support networks, right? Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Do yoga, download an app that everyone else is downloading. So even when we try to take care of ourselves as individuals, or we feel like we've been betrayed as individuals, there's still a collective piece of it that we kind of tap into to deal with whatever internal issue that we have going on. So I find that very fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting to just to think about how it is that we do move between aligning ourselves with others and breaking ourselves apart from others. And when you ask the question, Pheng, about the, like, connection between patriarchy and individualism, like, that is a deep, deep question. So, like, good thing we have at least an hour. But at, like, this very base, like, part of it is that, patriarchy, white supremacy, classism, like these ways that we chop ourselves up and make determinations about who we are, like, there are all ways that we sort of break down and break apart the broader collective. And then there are ways in which we leverage ourselves against others. In this case, we're talking about other human beings with patriarchy and racism and sexism. But I kind of think about, like, there is such a thing as, or at least, I have a sense of something that is an individual, that is me, and uh, it matters, and it's like a good thing. Like the way that I feel and interact with the world, my relationships with people, like all of that stuff is like good. What I bring to the world matters. But I think that we're a lot of what we're talking about in the connections between things like patriarchy and individualism is the ways that we've figured out to put ourselves in the center, where it's like what our value is how much we can control and how much we can gain and how much we have access to. And like, so it's a lot easier to gain and control and have access to things when men are seen more as more valuable than women, and when men are taught all the things that you were talking about that I also got, different versions of stuff around making decisions, being in control, being in charge, having access, that kind of stuff. When white people are better than folks who are not white, like, it allows for us to justify and move in ways that cause other people harm and give us more control. And I think that ultimately that's like that access to control and that access to power is at the center of what we're talking about. But and you align with other people in a collective way in order to accomplish it. To Brandon's point, like, I think that's the interesting thing about it. And so it's making my brain, I don't know, it's a question that you're asking, Pheng, but I just keep sort of like thinking about, like, what are we trading off then? Like, what is individualism versus what is possible when we aren't making trade-offs and leveraging for our own power and our own control and our own resources.
Yeah, I definitely think about that in terms of like the trade-off part that you're talking about, Ed, there. And when Brandon, when you were talking about like going into the woods and being secluded by yourselves, I was like, a lot of men do that. Not a lot, but we do see that. Like, there's these shows, I think, on the Discovery Channel that looks at people who live in Alaska, who they're like by themselves in the woods, and it tends to be mostly white men who are by themselves, and they've made it, or they're like okay. And I think there's one woman, she's like very far up north in Alaska. When I had time to watch that show, because it's interesting to really look at the trade-off that you're talking about, Ed, connected to the freedom of the individual freedom that Brandon is talking about, of like, they talk about ideas about like, I get to do what I want to do. I make the rules, right? I get to, but then the trade-off is like they're by themselves. They're like isolated. And I wonder about that with regards to, even though what was the movie that Tom Hanks was in, that he was in the island by himself?
Castaway.
Oh, Castaway, yes. And thinking about then like the human need for connection, right? The human need for connection, and what that looked like in that movie in Castaway, where Tom Hanks' character wanted and needed that human connection, that he made a volleyball into Wilson, right? Into a fake character so he could be connected. But then contrasting that with these lives that we're seeing on the Discovery Channel of these mostly male folks living in secluded spaces by themselves, and whether that's real or not, I don't know, because it's like they're saying it's real, but who knows? But they're by themselves in the woods, hundreds of miles away from cities and quote unquote what they would use as civilization, and they're by themselves. So I'm just like sitting with this, like these contrasts of, is that a notion of pre-individualism without the essence of what it means to be a male. But yet it's like we see men doing that only, and we don't see women folks doing that. So is that then still tied to the notions of like, yeah, men should be able to do that. They can be secluded by themselves. And it's really making me think of the poet, is it Ralph, the one that went into the woods for a year by himself? I forgot, what is it? I have two of them in my head, but I forgot which one, whether it was Thoreau or I forgot the other poet's name. But yeah, he went into the woods by himself for a year and was writing poetry.
That was Henry Thoreau. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know I feel like the whole conversation just feels very, I think, like Ed was saying, like it's just so much that's packed all in there. And something that someone had mentioned earlier was like this idea of preservation, or like preserving your sort of way of life. And I think about like the people who stormed the Capitol as people who would say like, we're defending our way of being in community together. And as we've said, like that community reflected white community. And I've heard that sort of same sentiment so often too, where it's like, well, we must preserve our way of life, our way of how we are with each other, with our families, and of course that's coming from other white folks. And so it's got me thinking about, if we can't see a bigger possibility of what community can be when we bring in other communities, where it's like we're actually looking to expand our communities and not stay so isolated and siloed, I guess. And I'm thinking, of course, from my like white guy perspective, but just that whole idea of this is the way that we do things and this is the only right and good way to do things, versus, okay, hold on. Like I think all of us could take a second and think, well, that doesn't make any sense. If we think about how many different types of people and communities there are out there, like, the possibilities are really endless when I think about that. So it's like, okay, preservation of safety and power and privilege is more, kind of what I hear when I hear that argument, versus, what are we finding in commonality within communities? What are the things that we all care and love and want to keep safe? And so I don't know, it's that it does feel like a push and a pull. And for myself, coming from a very individualistic, like that was kind of how I was brought up, it's very tricky to sort of disconnect yourself from that thinking, and then and then to be able to have an openness about how are other folks doing this? Like, what does it look like in other communities, in the LGBT community, in the Black community, in the Hmong community, Latinx? And so it just seems like there's, if folks have a willingness to at least like consider, yeah, what is this community care? Like, what do we even mean by that? What does it look like? And I think, yeah, to Brandon's point, it's like there are definitely, I feel like mostly communities of color who have so much more practice and knowledge and remembering of how that was done before, like, white supremacy and patriarchy and colonization and all of these things really rooted in the world, years ago.
Yeah, I think the problem absolutely comes from that. Yeah, in the individualism, making you think one way, don't think in your surroundings, and it affect us. Me as an individual, I remember growing up till I start having relationship with other people when I start open my mind a little bit more about other ones. Same once I was a father, then I started thinking, okay, now I have my daughters. I start worrying more about where my daughters were and what type of community they were growing up, and things that could cause harm on them. So it made me think a little bit more and start getting out of that individual part to start thinking more as a community. And now as a community engagement coordinator, it made me think a little bit more in not just maybe my community as a Puerto Rican, but thinking in other people, like people from Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, and start understanding their realities in order to start creating safer spaces that not only help my individual, my community, but also help other communities in general. And thinking as an individual, it even though it's the beginning, uh, hopefully open us to think eventually more in other communities and how we can support them better. But yeah, positions of powers are also having individuals that think, as an individual, obviously affect others, just considering how diverse are our communities and the world that we live in.
I was just thinking, as I was reflecting on what you were sharing, Sean, I was thinking about like when I do it, it's right, and when you do it, it's wrong. Like the notion of like right and wrong that's embedded in that self-preservation and self-interest part that's tied to the ideals of masculinity and manhood, and then tied to patriarchy, and then tied to what we think is right. Like when I do it, it's okay. So when I discipline or when I hit my partner, it's okay. But how dare she hit back at me? How dare she do that, right? Or how dare even in the conversations of sexual violence, and I'm thinking about this, is like, how dare that woman rape that young boy, right? But when the man is doing the raping of the young adolescent person, nobody says that. Everybody sort of says that's okay in some ways. So I'm just thinking about this like real self-interest part about like when I do it, it's right, and then when you did it, it's wrong, and I have every power in me, and that's vested inside of me and in the institutions that support my maleness, and to say that what you're doing is wrong, so I think there's like that's coming up for me too, of like that is also embedded in this conversation of like if I've been wrong, going back to that, if I've been wrong, you should know how you've wronged me, and you're going to get the taste of how you've wronged me. And when I've wronged you, it's okay, because you should just understand what you did to get me to this point, right? Like you should just understand. And I think those are like very male-centered and male-driven ideas about us giving privilege and power to men and masculine and male-identified folks, of like, you could do that. It goes to the boys will be boys, so let the boys be.
I also think it goes to the boys will be boys, but also men not processing our emotions well. Because that to me sounds like both of the examples you gave sounds like an internal process of lashing out, but it's like the pain that I harbor. So I'm going to inflict pain on you because I was hurt, and you should feel my pain and not question it. And that to me, that's a little bit deeper. And unfortunately, since we do have a lot of men who go through trauma and males who go through trauma, and we have this culture of not being able to seek out help for that trauma, not being able to talk about it, not even being able to feel it, right? Sometimes we're encouraged not to even feel the things that we go through. And then violence becomes an acceptable outtake, kind of acceptable way of processing or coping with that stress or trauma that we end up going through. And then we end up spreading that message onto other males and masculine folks that that's okay. And then it becomes acceptable culture, unfortunately. Even in the form of individuality, it's still a cultural thing. Well, I have the right to do this because I am male or I am a masculine person.
Yeah, and I guess you can, you can see it. You can think about individualism and collectivism. I mean, part of what we've been talking about here, I think, is the way that you can look at it even in your individualized relationships and how it will show up. I mean, I think about, I feel like it is a lifetime's worth of work to learn to be in relationship with people, in a way where I'm not trying to actually control uh, what happens, right? Like, and I don't like, there are ways of trying to control people's every move, or um, you know, a lot of the violence that we see exacted when people are systematically battering people is a certain way of controlling. And then there's the stuff like, um, you know, I want my neighbor to do to be a certain way, or to do a certain thing for me. And if he does, then I'll be nice and kind, and I'll, bring him a Christmas card and do stuff like that. And if he doesn't, then I will be a different way. Or I want to be in a relationship with a certain person. I want this friend. I want this partner. I want, I want things to be a certain way. And do I feel like I'm being slighted, or do I feel like things aren't actually okay? Or how do I feel about it when things aren't actually going the way that I want them to go? Um, and, uh, and I think it's like, it's part of our individualism, part of the way that we learn to be, and to be in ways that are, distinct, and, like, distinct isn't necessarily bad, but that sort of oppositional, or like at the expensive way of being that push towards the control. But there are other ways of being too. And when we talk about this stuff, it's like, it's not all broken, right? Like, um, there are so many examples of the way that I am in relationship with people in my life, or there are so many examples. Even, I was having a conversation the other day with folks about like small white towns, right? And like, there are places of, where colonization has happened. There are places where certainly, the effects of white supremacy, and you can see, problems. But there are also places where people will, bring each other supplies they need, make sure that nobody goes hungry, watch out and show up for one another when the neighbor, 6 blocks away, passes away. Like, there are all of these ways that we can see in our own lives, and in our community lives, that we actually show up in that way that says, I see you, I care about you, I want there to be more joy, I want there to be more safety, I want there to be more comfort in your life. This isn't coming with strings attached, all of that kind of stuff. Like, those things do exist, and we do them, and they are at the essence of what we do, and we do well, and we're in a collective way. And then there's like this stream and this push that, like, I feel like as life goes on, I see more and more and more about how much I actually, um, am, oftentimes basically fighting with myself to try to control the things that are happening around me. Um, and uh, and I think that, the things that Brandon was just talking about, and that Pheng was talking about, and the way that we, um, even can feel and understand, our own emotions and how we're feeling about ourselves, like, actually does play into that, a lot. But, at the core, like, individualism, patriarchy, like, it does come out in the very fabric of our relationships with one another.
Yeah, at the same time, we have been able to see the power of community care, utilizing social media, to provide resources to people in need after storms in Puerto Rico. At least we were able to see, how other countries gather, items to send that to Puerto Rico. And same, school supplies we see in here. When we see someone is hungry, like Ed mentioned, we see how communities are able to mobilize in order to support each other. Then when you think as individual, you think one person you will be able to do that? No, obviously we need each other in order to heal. We need everybody to be able to support each other. And I think with time now, social media and the way that a man and woman human interact with each other, we've been able to realize that power and the power of change, So the power of going to vote, the power of educating ourselves, not only about our culture, but about other cultures too, in order to have a better understanding and being able to support each other in better ways, and be able to understand better, that if a woman got raped in the middle of the night, it was not just because it was dark and she wasn't supposed to be there. It's just because some men don't understand that rape is not good, that women should have the same right to walk in the middle of the night by themselves and feel self insecure, and system that they feel protected, and also make other men accountable when that type of things happen. Same when women is pregnant, and sometimes they don't need the support, and they most of the time blame her because she didn't take care of herself instead of the man of wearing a condom. I mean, that's the importance of community, of educating ourselves, talking, break with those taboos of some topics are not, we shouldn't talk about it, or maybe sometimes when they're young boys, sometimes we think they're not ready to hear this type of conversation. No, we need to have this type of conversations to be sure that they're prepared, they can educate themselves, and create communities that they're more powerful and have a better understanding of each other.
One more thing I wanted to add to kind of shift the conversation around how do men kind of cope and deal with this is I don't think that we should lose individualism 100%. I think everybody brings uniqueness. So I hope that that's not coming through that we're saying just get rid of individualism, because your unique qualities are still important, but it is important to understand, are your unique qualities causing harm to yourself, to your community, or even beyond your community? And that's the important piece to really come through. One of the things I'm a big proponent of is a united, independent effort, especially when we talk about healing. And what I mean by that is we all have to do our self work, but don't lose sight of the communal work that you contribute to, and that also needs to happen at the same time. So it's not to just completely throw individualism away, but it's to say, think about yourself in the ecosystem of the social groups that you kind of find yourself in, and just in broader society, and how do you maintain your wellness in that space, and also make sure you're influencing other people's wellness to the best of your ability.
Yeah, I think that definitely, Brandon, goes to your point earlier about like that emotional care, is emotionally invested in your own care, but emotionally invested in the care of others' emotional well-being too, and physical well-being and spiritual well-being, not just your own, or not just have others invest in yours, but you have to be able to emotionally invest in others' emotional well-being, as a male identified person as well too, in terms of like making sure that others are cared for the way that Felix, you were talking about, and participating in that and being invested in that as they also invest in yours and your own growth. And I think that to me, that's what I found to be sort of like freeing, going back to Brandon's idea about what freedom is the both and, moving in strides together. And at some moments, community's freedom may move further than my own individual freedom. And I'm okay with that, because I know that there are some points along the journey, my freedom as an individual and as a male identified person will move further along than that of communities, and so it's like this sort of balancing act. And maybe perhaps it's even not that, but it's like this slow dance that we're doing between myself and community. And I'm not sure who's going to make what move, but something will happen, and some movement will take place, and we will move, right? And so I've been learning that, and that's how I've been sort of navigating in the course of even in this conversation about like my own individualism and my own self-preservation and self-interest, and my own self to that of community's interests, and investing in community, and investing in family, and investing in relationship means I have to be emotionally not only intelligent, but aware, insightful, And it's not just being about being thoughtful for me, right? But it's about paying attention to what it is that's being shared to me, what's not being shared to me, all of the nonverbal communication cues that I may, as I grew up, haven't been socialized to actually pay attention to. Uh,
I know for me, yeah, just thinking about that, the piece around self-care and community care, I feel like that's so often the message that we get is that self-care, and even thinking about that feels hard for lots of people. Like, where am I going to find time to like think about myself or like do that fun thing for myself or read that book or, you know, whatever it is. Um, and so it's like for me thinking about, you know, where I'm at in my life, it's like trying to make that an intentional practice of taking care of myself, not necessarily like, you know, whatever it is, going to get, you know, pampered or, you know, but just actually like taking care of myself, taking rests and breaks and, you know, taking care of hygiene and all of these things, right? Like that has become an easier concept for me. And the way that I'm thinking about community care now, it's like that almost feels like a bigger stretch too, because it's like not only do I have to be aware of myself, how much space I'm taking up, like just the balance that we have with relationships, with people that we're connected with, like that can feel really scary for me. You know, when it's like, it's, well, if I could focus on self-care in my basement at my home, you know, that feels so much easier oftentimes where it's like, yep, I'm going to choose in that moment to just focus on me. Whereas, you know, for me, it's like leaning into what feels kind of uncomfortable, especially now after we've all been isolated for so long, you know, with the pandemic and everything. It's like those social interactions for me, you know, feel trickier or harder, um, and yet in those moments where I have chosen to lean into it, it's like the most beautiful feeling. And, you know, it's like it surpasses any sort of like self-care that I could have done for myself if I had chosen to like disconnect and stay disconnected from community rather than, you know, accepting an invitation to come to a workshop or to have coffee virtually with someone or, um, so yeah, just thinking about the balances of, you know, as we're like growing in different areas of our life, then it's like it becomes more aware to me like, oh, and also this, I got to work on this piece, while also trying not to be completely overwhelmed by like the world in the state that it's in and all of the things I want to work on and do better and bringing people along as well. Like it's a lot. And so how do we find a balance like each day, each moment? I don't know. Um, but it's like the learning piece used to feel uncomfortable for me. And now I've seen that change. Like it's a transformation that's slowly happening where it's like, oh, I'm actually gonna choose to connect with Felix or someone about this rather than just, you know, trying to figure something else out on my own.
Well, I just really like the idea of being in a dance with the community. So Pheng made my day with that idea. Only recently have I embraced dancing, so so it makes me happy just to think about dancing. I live here alone in this house, and now I have to dance by myself. So there's at least a community, like a community out there that I'm always in a dance with that makes me feel good. But I do think that there's a part to this. I really appreciate Brandon saying that, like, we don't mean at all that like your uniqueness and your like what makes you you is like the things that make us individuals. That's not bad at all. Like, part of what I think healing is for me is realizing, you know, first of all, there are basic needs. People need safety and they need food and they need places to live and they need things like that. Like, um, uh, people are hurting when they don't have those things. And, you know, frankly, I believe that as a community, like we're all hurting when people are experiencing that. But my basic needs are met. And uh, I do have a dignity and a goodness and a sort of have things to contribute with who I am, my bad dancing and all. And there's like a lot of healing in really getting more and more and more comfortable with that part, with the part about like me as an individual. And like I don't have to prove anything in comparison to others or lean on anybody or be seen or recognized through other people's eyes in a certain way, like in order to be okay. Like I can be in my own 2 feet on my own, but I am in relationship with a much broader whole, a community. That dance that Pheng is talking about is like, it just is. It is regardless of what condition you find yourself in. It is regardless of whether you see a community as something to get something from or a community as something to enjoy, like growing with and building with and being with and learning from and contributing to. Like we are in a dance with our community and with our broader surroundings. And I guess for me, a part of the freedom is in and the joy is in seeing that like responding to the dance and the moves and the things that community needs, and being in relationship with people in ways that are attentive to all that stuff that I maybe didn't learn how to pay attention to that you were talking about, but learning to be more and more attentive to that and more connected to others people's well-being is actually some of the joy of my life right now. It's like about as good as it gets, is to be more and more connected to other people's well-being, more and more connected when there's need for support and love and care, more and more connected in ways that involve play and creativity. And that's the life that I'm hoping to live, and I hope that other people can be in that life too. And I guess it's one of those things where we get to kind of choose how we're going to step into our relationship with others and community. And I think if many of us are feeling the urge to step into more collective ways of being, that is a type of stream that might end up carrying a lot more than just us with it,
Thank you, Ed, for that. I think that that's a good segue in terms of like us closing out for this conversation. And so I'd have Felix or Brandon and myself included in that to sort of share any last thoughts, and then obviously have Sean close us out as always. I was just thinking about perhaps in 2 weeks, that's where my head was. In 2 weeks, we could really talk about the investment in community and what each of our journey looked like, As you were talking there, Ed, I was like, oh, how did I get to this place where I started dancing with community, right? And how did I get from this place of being in that house alone by myself, and then started inviting and opening up the windows and the doors to allow for community to enter and allow for me to exit as well too, right? And so as you were talking, I was just like, I'm sitting with that of like the opening up of ourselves and the unpacking of who we are to then be able to do, which is such a healing journey in itself, is that. And I find myself feeling more flexible in moving as I do the opening up of the doors and windows, if I can use that metaphor there. So I think I'm sitting with that. I think that's where I am at in this conversation at this moment as we're closing up here.
I would just close out and just add that, as men and masculine folks, we have to be sure that we are doing some self-reflection and understanding, what are we going through as individuals? What is the community going through? What are our values, and what morals and ethics do we take in that space as well, and make sure that we're taking the best care of ourselves as possible, and as well as trying to take care of the community to the best of our ability as well. But it's hard to take care of the community if you're not taking care of yourself. And if you see yourself as a complete individual, that might be a sign that you may need some additional help around your wellness, because we are humans, we are connected folks. I understand that there are introverts and extroverts and things of that nature, but that human connection is something that you can't lose. And many of us are struggling with that just now, dealing with COVID and being socially separated from so many people that we care and love about. So, and I'll end on that. Thank you.
What I can say now after Brandon just said that, of course, not much to say, but it's okay to understand that, like Brandon said, yeah, we're men, masculine folks. We also make mistakes. It's okay sometimes to feel isolated just because of maybe the harm that we have caused to others, and maybe don't have the guidance or don't have the people around you that can support you to have the tools to heal and to understand what self-care is. Because I'm totally sure maybe for some men that are listening to this podcast today, it's the first time they hearing about self-care, that I need to take care of myself, just because we've been teach all this time that we need to be strong and we need to be able to deal with everything. So hopefully this podcast is gonna help people to have a understanding that, yeah, we men also heal, men also need to take care of themselves, and we also depend on ourselves and our communities to create safer, better spaces. So thank you everyone. I learned a lot from all of you guys, and I'm looking forward to future conversation.
Yeah. You all summed it up very, very well. I echo that, Felix. Like, I learned so much from each of you in each of these conversations, and then like all of the time I spend kind of going back and thinking through, where, yeah, just kind of reevaluating what my values are, and yeah, I think that we don't often make time for that sort of self-reflection. So definitely encourage folks to do that. Um, And I was just thinking about, lots of people have, connected with us over these 12 conversations that we've had so far, and really connecting with what we're talking about, and resonating with some of those things. And I just want to just say again that, like, none of us here on this call are saying we have all of the answers or we know how to do this stuff. We're all kind of on that same journey, and it's just sort of recognizing where we're at in that journey and where we want to continue building community, and building ourselves up within that community. So I just think about all the people I love and care about, and all of the other people who, the ripple effects of us having these conversations is really powerful and extending. So thank you to all of you who are tuning in to our conversations here, and joining and commenting. We're seeing those comments, and we're just grateful that we can build this up together. And as always, we'd love to just recognize and thank our funding partners, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, the Novo Foundation, as well as the Women's Foundation, for all their support in helping these conversations continue. And just a reminder for folks, we're doing these every other Thursday. So our next 13th conversation will be on Thursday, February 11th at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. So we hope you can join us back for that next conversation, where I think we're going to dive a little deeper into how do we invest in community care? What does that look like? We'll continue this conversation. So thank you again. If you'd like notifications about these conversations, want to catch up on previous conversations we've had, we've got a link in the description for this video for all of our previous conversations. And yeah, we're just looking forward to continuing it, and we'll join you in another 2 weeks. So we hope you all are well.